our Spring into Crafting mini-series. My name is Leah Zahner. I am your moderator for today's event. And today's event is brought to you by Craftsy, the Knitting Circle, National Quilters Circle, and National Sewing Circle. They've all teamed up to provide a full week of live demonstrations and a bundle of free springtime patterns and recipes. You'll want to make sure to download those free patterns and recipes by clicking the link in the description. Now, every day this week, a new instructor is going to be here to stream live as we knit, sew, quilt, and bake together. They will provide step-by-step demonstrations of these fun springtime projects. Now, if you have any questions at all during the event, please leave your comments in the blue chat box below or in the chat on Facebook and YouTube. And I, of course, will be monitoring the comments during the event. And I must say, we are already looking pretty active today. So if you would like to drop in any comments or any questions into that chat box, right now, the topic that I'd like to highlight is how you think you might use this knitting project. So these are some tulips we're knitting today. And if you have any ideas of how you might be using them and you're curious about how others might be using them, we're gonna crowdsource that right in the chat box. Drop a comment. And of course, any questions that you have for Jen throughout the project, I will feed to her as we go through those step-by-step instructions. So I've already mentioned her. It's going to be time to say hello to her. Jen Lucas is joining us today. She is our knitting expert and the managing editor of the Knitting Circle. Hey, Jen, thank you so much for being here. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and then intro the project that we'll be doing and maybe give us a few of your ideas for how to use it.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Leah. Like Leah said, I'm Jen Lucas. I'm managing editor of the Knitting Circle. I'm a knit and crochet designer. I've written 6 books about knitting. I go around the country and teach about knitting. I basically think about knitting all the time. So today we're going to be making these cute little tulips. I have a couple here that I've already finished. And so these are really simple. These might not be a project that's like, if you're a super beginner, as in you've never knit anything, this might not be a great first project, but I would say that it is pretty beginner friendly in that you just, once you know the basics of knitting, you really can handle doing this. And so we're going to just start at the bottom at the stem and work our way up. I think that these would be cute in so many different ways. I was thinking like for any sort of holiday or any gifts that you have to give coming up, like this would be really cute, sort of tied on a gift. I think if you took some pipe cleaner and maybe ran it into the stem or use some different wire to work around the petals, you really could make something truly 3-dimensional. I knit them at a little bit of a tighter gauge than maybe what's called for normally for the yarn. So they do have some sort of structure to them, but I do think with like a little bit of wire, you could make a really cool bouquet of knitted flowers. So I'm really excited to show you how to make this.
Great. And as always, drop your own ideas in. So if you have something in mind for this project when you're done, share it in the comment box. Any questions for Jen about the step that she's on in the project? I'm going to try to get them to her while we're working. Other more general questions we'll save till the end and get to as many as possible. So I'm going to send it right to Jen to get us started with our very first step. Here we go.
Okay, great. I'm just going to tilt my camera down here so you can see my hands while I'm knitting, and I'll zoom in a little bit too, just so we can really see what's going on here. Just get, there we go. Okay, hands will go here. That's great. Okay, so to start, we're going to start by casting on with our yarn that's for the stem. So I'm just using a green yarn here. We're going to be using a worsted weight yarn. This project, though, really, you could make it with any weight of yarn and really with leftovers. For the stem, you really need, and the leaf that will eventually go on the stem, you only need about 5 yards of worsted weight yarn. And for the flower portion, you really only need 20 yards. And that's honestly a little bit of an overestimation. So really great project for leftovers. For the pattern, it calls for a size 6 needle. We're going to be using double pointed needles here today. And that is a slightly smaller needle than what you might normally use for a worsted weight yarn. If you're sort of a standard knitter, you know, you're one of those knitters that always gets gauge, you might be thinking a size 6. seems like a little bit small for the worsted weight. But again, I wanted the fabric to be a little bit tighter, especially on the petals. So that's why I chose to go with a slightly smaller needle. But really, this will work with any size needle, any size yarn. You really can play around with it to make it your own. So to begin, we're going to cast on 4 stitches, and you can use any method of cast on that you want. I'm just going to use a long tail because that's pretty much my standard. So I'm going to start by making a slip knot here. And then I'm going to cast on 3 more stitches using the long tail cast on. If you need a reminder on how to do the long tail cast on, we do have a free video on the Knitting Circle that will show you slow, and you can watch it as many times as you want. And you can also come back to this and watch the replay too. So I have my 4 stitches cast on. Again, I have it on the double pointed needle. Now we're going to start working I-cord. And so if you're not familiar with I-cord, basically it's a small little knitted tube, which is exactly what we have here. And so when you're making I-cord, many times you'll see it made somewhere between 3 and 5 stitches. Obviously, I'm using 4 right in the middle. You might see some configurations that use slightly more stitches, maybe 6. But once you really get above 6 stitches, you really have a hard time having the fabric form into this nice little tube. You can also find little I-cord machines. They're like these little crank things. You can find them at the craft store that will make I-cord as well. So that's an option if you don't like to knit I-cord. I personally love to knit I-cord, and it's only 20 rounds total. So it really is pretty short. So we just have our 4 stitches cast on. And so normally you're thinking, okay, I'm knitting, so I'm going to like turn this around and put it in my other hand. Well, with I-cord, what we're going to do is we're going to slide the stitches down the needle so they come to the other side of the needle, and now we're going to knit them like this. And this seems a little confusing at first because our working yarn here is on the left side, and you're thinking, well, gee, I really need it on the right side of this in order to be able to knit. But with I-cord, you're actually just going to work into the stitch, bringing that yarn from over here on the left, you're just bringing it over here to the right to knit it. And so then we're just going to knit those 4 stitches. And so this is why you need something like DPNs, double pointed needles, or a circular needle, because now we knit 1 row or round. We're going to slide this back down to this end and knit again. And so what ends up happening is you start to form a tube, a very tiny little thin tube. And so you're just going to keep working like that for 20 rounds. And so you can see at first, this kind of back here just kind of looks like a big old mess, really. But after we start working a few more rounds, and I'll do a couple more here for you, you'll see that it starts to sort of form into that tube, and everything sort of comes together to make that nice tube shape, which we are using as our stem. So here we go. And again, I'm just sliding down. Now, if you're using some other type of needle, if you're doing using a circular needle, you could also do this project using magic loop as far as circular needles go. You can't really use just like a regular circular needle to knit in the round. This project's way too small for that. If you don't like the sliding back and forth like this, you can then slip the stitches from one needle back to the other and then knit them. But I find that that's just opening up an opportunity to drop a stitch, which is obviously something we don't want when we're knitting. So I find just sliding it down like this and then working the next round of I-cord is the easiest way to do it. And so I'll just finish these couple stitches and then we'll take a look at the back of this here. So you can see here on the back, it really is just starting to form. You just kind of give everything a tug. And you can see even now on the back, it's just started to form this cute little tube here. And that's going to be our stem. And so again, I think that if you wanted to make this project more 3-dimensional, you could ultimately try sticking a wire down there. Obviously, if this is something that you're going to be giving to a child, I wouldn't recommend putting a wire, pipe cleaner, or something like that in there. But if you're just making something that's like home decor for yourself, I think you could stick a wire right down in here, pipe cleaner, something to just give it something that you could, have it be more three-dimensional, and you could have it be upright. So you're going to continue working this I-cord for 20 rounds. And after that, you're going to have something that looks like this. I've already knit it, so you don't have to sit here and watch me knit 20 rounds of I-cord. So here we go. So once we have the I-cord done, we're going to start doing a little bit of increasing before we change colors for our petals or the flower. And again, you can see here on the back, it's just formed this nice continuous tube. And again, you just kind of tug on it. It's pretty stretchy. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to do some increases. And so the increases that we're using for this entire flower is a knit into the front and back. You can really use any increase that you like when you're making this. I just chose the knit front and back because honestly, for me personally, I think it's the easiest and I liked the way that it looked on my project. So for this next round, when I finished the round, my stitches were down here and now I'm sliding them down. And now I'm going to start increasing. And so to knit into the front and back, I'm going to insert my needle as if I'm going to knit. I'm going to knit that first stitch. I'm not going to take the stitch off the left needle. I'm going to come around to the back and go into that same stitch again in the back and knit it. So I knit into the front and I knit into the back. So where I had one stitch, I now have two. And I'm going to do that all the way down. Knit into the front, come around, knit into the back. And I'm just going to keep doing that for each stitch. And so each stitch started as one stitch, and then I'm increasing it to two stitches. So when I'm done with this, now I will have hopefully 8 stitches because I knit into the front and back of each one. So they're kind of all crammed up here, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I have my 8 stitches. And so now we're going to start knitting in the round. We can't really keep doing this I-cord business because you will get a huge gap, trying to work in this way. So now we're going to start knitting in the round. And so I'm going to do that with the double pointed needles. And to do this, when you buy a set of double pointed needles, typically they come in a set of 5. You can occasionally find ones that come in a set of 6, which really it's just so if you break one or lose one, you still have basically a full set. So you have your set of 5 double pointed needles. And so you can set this up however you're most comfortable when you are working with double pointed needles. But what I like to do on small projects like this is I like to set up my stitches on 3 needles and use my 4th needle to knit. The 5th needle I don't even need. But you can do whatever you like. If you want to have 4 set up and use the 5th to knit, that's fine. So let's distribute these stitches and then you'll be able to see better what I mean. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm just slipping my stitches to sort of form it into being in the round. So this was the start of my round here. So I'm going to put 2 stitches on this one, bring in the next needle, slip. I'm just slipping purlwise. So I'm just going in purlwise and slipping 2 more stitches here. And then my 3rd needle, which was the one I was already using, has 4 stitches. So you can see here now I've made this like little triangle. And again, this is my personal preference. I like to, even when I'm doing something like socks on double pointed needles, this is just my preferred way, especially something small like this. You get a 4th needle in here. That's a lot of needles you're trying to, hold all at once. So I like to split it 1/4 of the stitches on the 1st needle, 1/4 of the stitches on the 2nd needle, and then half the stitches on the 3rd. So now that we have distributed our stitches, I'm just going to grab a stitch marker. I just have these little plastic locking stitch markers. There's just the ones I like. You can find them just about any craft store or online. And I'm just putting it into the knitting here. Let me put it in and then I'll show you here. So it's literally just in the knitting. So I know that's the beginning of my round. Sometimes when I'm knitting, I am kind of lazy. I'm kind of a lazy knitter. And so I won't always use stitch markers. Like if I'm making something like a sock or a hat, sometimes I'll just be like, oh, I can see that my tail is here. I know that's the start of my round. With this though, with the I cord, it's really hard to tell based on your tail where the start of your round is. So I really recommend getting one of these locking stitch markers. There's all different kinds that you can get, and putting it in so you know exactly where you are for the start of the round, because knowing the start of the round is important. So now that
I'm going to interject just for a quick.
Oh, yes, please.
Get started. Patrice is asking if you recommend the round needles for something like this.
The round needles, like as in circular needles, I guess.
She didn't specify. Patrice, if you want to go ahead and specify, drop that into the chat box as well. I'm not sure if she means the circular needles or the round shape. I'm not sure.
Round shape. Okay, well, I'll talk about both. So we'll cover both. So as far as circular needles go, you really can only use a circular needle for this particular project if it's long enough to knit using the magic loop method, or if you have two circular needles and you're knitting on two circulars. So those are some different methods for knitting in the round. Because when you are using a circular needle, you have that cord. Typically, the smallest standard circular needle is 16 inches, and this is not 16 inches, even at its widest point. You can get 9-inch circulars, which are more for socks. But again, it's going to be, you're not going to have enough stitches at the beginning to sort of use the circular needle in the traditional way. So that's why I recommend just using the double pointed needles, or if you're comfortable with magic loop or two circular method, you can use those too. As far as if we're talking about the shape of the needle, so there are different shapes. So, you know, most knitting needles are round in that they're smooth and they're round. There are square shaped needles. I have seen ones that are more like hexagons. And those are supposed to help. Some knitters find that those types of needles keep their stitches more even. I personally prefer just the sort of standard needle. You absolutely, if that's what you're talking about, as far as using a square needle or a hexagonal needle, that's fine. Whatever needle you like to use is fine. It will definitely work for this project.
Well, it looks like she was looking for the circular needle.
Okay.
But I'm glad you covered both, because I know for sure there are people out there that have the same question. So thank you for putting that through, Patrice.
Yeah, of course.
All right, we can keep on rolling.
Okay, great. So now I'm ready to start working in the round. And so the first round, I'm just going to simply knit all the stitches, which I'm going to show you how to do, just so you can kind of see how this whole jumble of needles gets set up. So I have my 3 needles with the stitches, and I have my 4th free needle that I'm knitting with. And I'm just starting here at the beginning of the round. And this honestly is just a little bit of experimentation. If you have never used double pointed needles before, it really is just taking some time and practicing how it feels most comfortable for you to hold it. Even just regular knitting needles, 2 straight knitting needles, I've seen people knit all sorts of different ways, hold their needles all sorts of ways. You need to figure out what's most comfortable for you and do that. As long as your stitches are even, you're not making anything super tight or super loose, you're good. So as I'm working these, I'm just knitting this first round, and I'm just knitting the stitches. And so when I come to the end, this one only had 2 stitches on it. Well, now I have a free needle again. So I'm just turning it to go to the next one, and then knitting those stitches. And again, at the beginning, this is a little fiddly. It does not matter if you are a beginner or an expert knitter. When you're talking about a small number of stitches on these double points, it is a little fiddly for everyone at the beginning. So we're just working across here. And then we're at the end of our round, because we're back to our stitch marker here. And so then we're going to move on to doing another increase round. And so this time we're going to be knitting into the front and back, and then knitting 1. So basically we're doing an increase, then a knit 1, an increase, then a knit 1. So we're going to start, and again, just using that knit front and back, knit front and back, and then knit one. And we're going to do that all the way around. And all these instructions are in the download that's available for this pattern, with pictures too. So if you're a little bit confused or you're worried about having to remember exactly what I'm doing, we have the instructions for you. And so again, I'm just knitting into the front and back and then knitting one. Now this needle's empty, going to the next one. I'm just doing this all the way around. And then we're going to work just one more round of plain knitting. So I don't know, maybe if there's any questions, now would be a good time to answer them while I'm just knitting this next round before the next step I want to show you.
Yeah, we do have a little activity in the chat box here. First, Linda has mentioned that she's going to be using these in Easter baskets. And you know what, Linda, your comment made me kind of think, if you're trying to nestle little plastic eggs, maybe the tulip is big enough to hold one of those. I don't know, Jen, if you wanted to tell us.
Oh, yeah.
Fit.
Yeah, I think an egg would definitely, it would definitely, I think you could for sure get an egg, one of those regular size plastic eggs in there, or maybe some of those chocolate eggs, several of them would fit in there as well. That sounds good to me. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Super cute.
Some of our candy treats could go in there.
Yeah.
And then a more general comment coming in from Marisol that I would love to hear a little bit more from you, Jen, on this. Marisol bought knitting materials last year, but never has used them yet, and looking for videos to teach me how to do it. So Jen, you mentioned one video specifically about just casting on, but where can people find some other ideas?
Well, you know, obviously the Knitting Circle is a great place to find all sorts of videos, but if you are brand new on the Knitting Circle, we actually have a 14-day Learn to Knit series. And so this is perfect. Even if you're not brand new and you just need some review, it's great. But the 14-day Learn to Knit series is the first, I think it's about 8 or 9 videos are going through all of the super basic things you need to know for knitting. And I show you how to do those things using the English method, which is where you have the yarn in your right hand, which is how I'm knitting today, because that's how I knit. But I also show you in those videos how to knit continental style, which is with the yarn in your left hand. So if you are left-handed and just learning to knit, you can try both, see what you like. Most left-handed people do use the continental method. And then the last few videos, I actually walk you through a project, which is just a really small, easy cowl, but it's the perfect first project because it teaches you, like, you review all the basic things you've learned in the first few videos. So if you're brand new to knitting, I recommend checking out the 14-day Learn to Knit series that we have on the Knitting Circle.
And we do have a fantastic behind the scenes team. So if you look at the chat box right now, they have dropped in a link to that 14-day Learn to Knit series that Jen just highlighted. So go ahead and click that link if that's something that sounds exciting for you. If you want to jump into that, it's available for you in the chat box.
Yeah, and it's totally free, and there's a download for the pattern and some other things too that come with it. So it's really great if you're just learning how to knit. I mean, I obviously think it's great I made it, but it gives you all the step-by-steps that you need to learn how to knit. So,
right. And we have a thank you for showing both methods. I'm still not sure which I like best. So
yes,
you can have both.
Right. That's exactly right. Is everyone knits a little different. There's no wrong way to knit, really. It's really hard to find a wrong way to knit. It's about figuring out what you're most comfortable with, really.
All right, that's it for now. So we
can great.
The next step.
Okay, great. So now I've just knit that next round. And again, we have the pattern instructions for you. So now we're done with the green for now until we're going to get to the point where we have to make the leaf, but that's later. So I'm going to go ahead and just trim the yarn, leaving, I don't know, a 6 to 8 inch tail so I can weave it in later. And we're going to introduce our pink. This is what I'm using for my flower. Obviously, you use whatever color makes you happy. And now we're going to start knitting with this color. And this is a question that we get a lot at the Knitting Circle and just in general, is about how to work in a new color or even just a new ball of yarn. It's really just as easy as starting to knit with the new color. So we have our tail here from our green yarn, and now we're just going to start knitting with the pink. Sometimes, not always, but a lot of times what I'll just do, honestly, is I'll just knit the first stitch with the old color and the new color together, but you just need to remember to treat that as a single stitch when you come back around to the beginning. So for this first stitch here where I have the new color, it's a knit into the front and the back. So I'm just knitting the first part of that with both. And then when I go to knit into the back, then I'm just using the pink. Again, that's really just a personal preference. Again, I'm just kind of lazy. And so this just kind of secures both of them together. And once it's done and you kind of pull on the tails, you really can't see that you used both colors together in that stitch. If you don't like that method, you can just knit the first stitch with the new color. That first stitch is a little bit loose, but when you weave in the ends, you just tighten it up. And so now we're basically just continuing to work around, and you can even see here already, it's still a little fiddly, but we're adding more stitches. And so everything's getting a little more spread out. So this round now I'm knitting into the front and back and then knitting two. So you're getting more stitches on the needle. Everything's starting to spread out more, and it becomes a lot less fiddly now as we continue to work around. And so I'm just going to finish off this round, and then if we have any questions, we can answer those, but then we can talk about what to do after you're done with your increases.
No questions have come in at the moment. I think we're watching your knitting.
Great.
Entrancing. But this is a good time for a reminder that you don't have to hold any questions that are more general. Feel free to drop things that maybe aren't directly tied to the project we're working on right now. Jen can take some of those questions as time permits. But of course, if you see something that you have a question on, go ahead and ask, because even if you're not knitting along with us live as this project is going, you can come back and watch the replay when it's time to dig into the project for yourself. And your question will be there for Jen to elaborate on, that you can go back to and use that tip later. All right, Jen, I'm going to send it back to you and keep an eye on any questions that might come in.
Okay, awesome. So now I'm just knitting around. So basically the pattern at this point is that you're doing some increases every other round. And so right now I'm just knitting the round in between, which is just plain knitting. I'm just knitting every stitch, just continuing to work around like I have been. And here, if I just finish off this needle here, you will see that here's where I started, right here. And so right here is where I joined that new yarn. Let me see if I can bring that up. Just there we go, a little bit. And so you can see when I came around to the next round, I just was sure to treat that as a single stitch. That's sort of the disadvantage to if that first stitch, when you're changing colors, you hold them together, is you do run the risk of when you come back around to it, you might inadvertently treat them as two different stitches because you have the two strands of yarn. So you just want to make sure that you do what I did here, that you knit it as a single stitch. And then you can see that this stitch here, it is a little bit loose. But again, even if already we just kind of give our tails a little bit of a tug, you can see it's already starting to tighten up a bit. And you can really fix this stitch however you want once you go to weave in the ends, you know, so you can make it nice and tight and tidy when you go to weave in the ends. And so you're just going to keep working around until you have 44 stitches. So on the increase rounds, we're increasing 3 stitches with that knit front and back, and then we just start having more knits in between. So the next one, it's knit front and back, knit 3, and you do that all the way around. Then the next time you increase, it's knit front and back, knit 4 all the way around. So you can kind of see how the increases go. And if we take a look at our finished one here, these lines here are, excuse me, I said we were increasing 3 times, but we're actually increasing 4 times around. But you can see here that these little lines here are where I did my increases. And I think that knit front and back is actually kind of decorative. I think it's really pretty. And what I like is that we did do the 4 increases, but then we're making 3 petals. And I personally sort of like that those increases don't like perfectly line up, like going into a petal, because every flower looks different, right? I mean, you don't look at a flower and it like every line goes like straight up, you know, all perfectly in one direction. So I really sort of like that little detail of having the 4 increase lines going around, but then we're only making the 3 petals. So once we have done all of our increases, we'll increase to 44 stitches, and then you'll do a round where you only add 1 more increase. So you have 45 stitches. And that's because we want to make 3 petals. And so to make the 3 petals, I wanted 45 stitches because 45 divided by 3 is 15. And so that just made for easy math. That way all the petals are the same size. So once I get to the 45 stitches, now we're going to start working back and forth in rows. And I just keep doing this on my double pointed needles. I'm not switching to any other kind of needle. And the other thing is that I then will, and I've already done it on this sample, is I then rearrange my stitches so that I have 15 on each needle. So when you get done with all those increases, you're not going to have it split evenly on all 3 needles, because remember, we had a quarter on one, a quarter on the next one, and then half on the 3rd needle. So after I get done with those increases and right before I start working back and forth in rows, I'm going to just slip my stitches, sort of like I did at the beginning. When I was setting up to work in the round, I'm slipping those stitches purlwise to get 15 on each needle. And so now we're going to start working back and forth in rows. I didn't put a stitch marker on here, but this is where the stitch marker would be for the beginning of my round. And now we're going to just work over these 15 stitches to do a petal. And so what's nice about rearranging the stitches so that there's 15 on each, these other 2 needles back here, they're just going to hang out back here while I'm only working back and forth on these. So for the first stitch, or for the first petal, my yarn is still attached. So it's very convenient because I'm just going to keep working right along here. So we're going to knit 1, and then we're going to slip, slip, knit. And so that decrease is slip as if to knit, slip as if to knit, and then knit them together through the back loops. So we're going to slip as if to knit, slip as if to knit, knit 2 together through the back loops. Again, there's videos for this on the Knitting Circle and in that 14-day Learn to Knit. So if you need a review on those 2 later, you can go back for those videos. And then we're going to knit 9. There we go. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And so we'll have 3 stitches left on this needle because we started with 15. We're going to knit 2 together. And so that's another decrease. That decrease, you're simply going into both stitches together. So I have 2 stitches here. We're going to knit them together and knit 1. So basically we did a slip, slip, knit at the beginning and a knit 2 together at the end. Now, again, you can really use whatever single decrease you want. That's going to take 2 stitches and turn it into 1. I chose these decreases because the slip, slip, knit is going to lean to the left and the knit 2 together is going to lean to the right. And so that just kind of follows the shape of the petal. But if you hate to slip, slip, knit, I mean, it's your flower. So you could use any decrease really that you like, as long as it's taking 2 stitches and turning it into 1. So now when we're working the wrong sides are pretty much the same for almost the entire petal. We're going to slip 1 with the yarn in the front. And so I'm slipping purlwise this way, and I have my yarn in the front. So when we're slipping with the yarn in the front, that has nothing to do with right side or wrong side. That is facing us. So it's in front because it's facing us in front, or in back as in it's in back of the work. So we're going to slip 1 with the yarn in the front. We're going to knit 1. And then we're going to basically purl 9, which is just purling to the last 2 stitches on this needle because we split up our stitches evenly. And so once we get to the last 2 stitches, we are just going to knit 2. And so I'm to the last 2. I'm bringing my yarn. I'm switching from knit or from purl to knit. I want to make sure I'm bringing the yarn in between the needle. Don't bring it over. You'll make a yarn over and an extra stitch. We're going to bring it in between and knit 2. And so basically you're going to be following that sort of pattern for the entire rest of the petal. And when we get to the end, we'll just be doing a little bit of extra decreasing at the top in order to just make this nice little point. And so you'll just follow the pattern instructions to do that. I'm not going to sit here and knit a whole petal for you because it is pretty much almost the same thing for every single row. And then once that's done, you'll just fasten it off and you'll have a tail here to weave in. So then, okay, great. What do you do when you want to do the next petal? So I'm just going to go ahead. We'll pretend like this petal here is done. So this one would be done, but let's say we want to start our next petal over here. So there's no yarn. What do we do? Well, it's just like sort of when we changed colors. We're just simply now, I like to just insert my needle because the first stitch is a knit. Get a little bit of yarn here, make sure I'm leaving a tail. I'm going to just make a loop, stick it on the needle. That's my knit stitch, pull it through. And now my yarn is attached. And again, this will be a little bit loose, but we'll just tighten it up as we go. And when we go to weave in the end, we can tighten it. And then for all 3 of the petals, they're all using the same instructions. The only thing is that you just need to add that new yarn and work the rest of the petal. So then once the petals are done, you'll have something that looks like this. It just now needs a leaf.
Hey, before we go into the leaf step, there are a few questions that came in that I'd love to give to you, Jen. Are you ready?
Oh, I'm ready.
All right. So we have a couple here. First is a nice, simple one coming from Terry. Could you use fabric stiffener spray on these if you wanted to?
I mean, I don't see why not. It really just would depend on if it would interact with your yarn. I mean, I knit these out of an acrylic yarn. So yeah, I mean, I think it would be worth a try. I think you just need to go into it knowing that you're taking a risk that you don't, depending on your yarn, you don't necessarily know how that would interact. But yeah, I also thought it would be cool if you do know how to felt your knitting, which is the process of where you've knit something out of wool and then you get it wet and like hot, wet, and you agitate it, then you can shrink it down. I thought if you knit this in something really bulky and make it really huge, you could then do the process of felting it. And then that typically, because all the stitches sort of shrink down and make this really tight, dense fabric, that would also be another way that you can make this very sort of 3-dimensional without having to introduce any kind of wire or anything into it.
All right, let's move to Carrie's question next. Do you move your stitch marker up every few rows as you're working upward?
So that's a really great question. And that honestly is sort of a personal preference. So here where I've started, this is the first part I did. I just had it hanging down here. And this one, I mean, I added the stitch marker in, but again, this all goes back to, I'm kind of a lazy knitter. So I probably just end up leaving my stitch marker down here. However, you need to do what works best for you and your project. So yes, if having this down here, it's a little hard for you to keep track of, that's the beginning of your round. Yes, absolutely. Move it up every few rounds. I'm just somebody that wouldn't recommend moving it up every single round because I mean, you are wasting a little bit of time moving your marker every round, but yes, every few rounds, absolutely. It would be a great idea to move your marker if that's going to help you.
Okay, a couple more questions that are specific to where we are right now in the project.
Okay.
Coming here from DT, I believe. Is this project going to need to be blocked?
So the answer is maybe. It because you're making it with like this one's made with an acrylic yarn. It's a pretty tight fabric. My stitches looked pretty good. I did hit this with some steam on my iron. I did not iron it, like physically put the iron onto my stitches. Because with the acrylic, it will melt and also it will really, really flatten your stitches out. So I did hit it with a little bit of steam just to sort of even everything out. If you're making this out of something that is wool or other animal fiber, you absolutely could wet block it. It would really help it hold its shape. I mean, the I-cord is going to be kind of a loose thing. That's just the nature of the fabric. But yeah, it's really up to you. If you get done though, and you did it in the acrylic yarn at a tight gauge and you're happy with your stitches and the way they look, you don't have to block this. This is not something that blocking is absolutely required.
Okay, and our last question for right now comes in from Wendy. When you added in the new yarn again, did you actually use a loop to make the stitch more secure?
So here, let me come back to, let's see, here we go. Let's bring this one back in here. So all I did was, I'll just take it back out and show you again. So we have our stitch here, split the yarn a bit, there we go. Okay, so here's where I want to attach my new yarn. So I just make a loop in that I basically just fold the yarn over itself like this. I'm not making a slip knot or anything. I just sort of make, an upside down U or a horseshoe. And then when I go to start wherever I'm going to start, we'll start over here. I just insert my needle and then I just take that where I have folded over right here. There's no knot or anything. I just take that and kind of pinch it as I bring the yarn through. So then I just have my working yarn and my tail hanging out here. So I'm not like making any kind of knot or any kind of special loop. I'm basically just folding the yarn over itself to sort of create what looks like a loop that I can then put onto my needle.
Okay, I'm going to end the question chunk right here so that Jen can move on to the next step in the project. But as always, we'll have a little bit of time towards the end for some more general questions, and keep asking anything that pops up as we move into the next step.
Great. So now we're going to talk about the leaf. And this is the part I was really excited about adding the leaf, because I was like, well, I got done. And at first I was like, well, this is cute. But I was like, no, it definitely needs a leaf. So to do this, it's not really tricky, but it's something maybe you haven't seen, especially if you're new to knitting. So we're going to pick up and knit stitches. And so we're just going to start by taking one of our needle. Well, now all our needles are free. So we're going to take one of our free needles, and you can really put the leaf wherever you want. If you want to make more than one leaf, you are welcome to do that. So we're going to pick up and knit, but as we're going to pick up and knit, this is sort of happening on, I guess, the wrong side. There's not really a right side or a wrong side, but there is a right side and a wrong side to the leaf. So here I've got stockinette. So I've got the knit stitches on the right side, and the wrong side does have pearls. So, I mean, it still looks cute either way. But so you do need to kind of think about where your leaf is going to go, because there is sort of a direction or a side to the leaf. So I think about it as I'm putting the leaf, I'm picking up and knitting on the wrong side. So if I want my leaf like over here somewhere, I want to make sure that I'm picking it up this way, because the first row is the right side row after we pick up. So let me just show you what I mean. So let's go ahead and just pick up right here. And so we're going to pick up 5 stitches, and it's really, again, up to you where you're going to do this. So we're going to pick up and knit. So what does that mean? I like to go under 2 loops, both legs of the stitch. I'm going to insert my needle, and I have the 2 legs of the stitch on here. Again, doing exactly what I did before. I folded the yarn over itself to make a little loop here. And I'm just pinching it while I hold it, and then I'm going to bring it through to create a stitch. So that's picking up and knitting. So if I was just picking up, I would just be going under 1 leg or 2 and then treating that as a stitch. But we're going to go under, and then now we're going to knit, because now the yarn's attached. We're going to knit and bring it back through, and that's our second stitch. And so we're making 5 stitches. And so it's again, kind of personal preference. If you like how it looks going under only 1 leg of the stitches of the I-cord, you absolutely can do that. I find that it tends to make a little bit of a gap. It just like almost separates like what's going to be the leaf from the stem. Doing it this way and going under both loops just makes it a little more secure. There's not a gap. It's a little more solid, looks like an actual leaf. And so now we're going to just do we've got 4, And so now we're doing 5. And so for this first step, we only needed 1 needle. So there we go. So in our first stitch, again, it's a little bit loose just because we attached the yarn, but there you go. And so now we're just going to start working our pattern, which the stem or the leaf, excuse me, really is very similar to how the petals of the flower are worked. We're doing all the same things here. So we're going to slip the first stitch with the yarn in the front. We're going to knit front and back. These are all things we already learned. We're going to knit 1, knit front and back, and then knit 1. So we had 5 stitches, and now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, because we did the 2 knit front and back. So that was the right side. For the wrong sides, we're going to be doing that slip 1 with the yarn in the front, always slipping purlwise. Then we're going to knit 1, purl to the last 2 stitches, and then knit 2. So we've got 2 more stitches on the needle. So now we're just going to knit 2. And so you're just going to keep following this pattern. We're going to do another increase. We're going to work some straight rows. And then really we're just decreasing in almost the exact same manner that we did with the petals. So it's actually really easy to create this leaf. And I do think that this is somewhere where you could really sort of make it your own. If you want a bigger leaf, if you want a smaller leaf, it's just very easy to just sort of change it a little bit by adding or subtracting rows or adding some more increases. It's really up to you. And so you'll just keep working your leaf and finish it off in the exact same way as the petals. And there you go. And then so once you're done, you'll have to weave in your ends. And so I'll bring in another sample here and we can talk about how to weave in your ends, especially on the I-cord.
Great time for a quick refresher question coming in from Carla.
Sure.
So you've been using your DPNs or your double pointed needles. She is curious if you need to use those or could you use small circular for this project?
So it would be really hard to use a small circular for this project because it is so small. Really the smallest circulars that I've really seen I think are 8 or 9 inches. And so if you were doing this with if you were making a bulky one, you might be able to make it would be big enough here to use that circular needle. But for the most part, if you're going to use the circular, you're going to have to use the magic loop method or the 2 circular method to make this one. It's going to be really hard to do this using just sort of a standard circular needle.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so then let's talk about weaving in the ends. Let's bring in this one. So once your flower would obviously be done, but we're just going to talk about weaving in the ends on this little sample here. So when you're weaving in the ends, one thing that's really nice about I-cord is that you can really very easily hide your tail, your yarn tails into it. And so any of your stem or leaf tails, you can really just work it into the I-cord. And so I just kind of come through like this and then back down and just sort of weave it in a little bit just to sort of catch it so it's not just going to come all right back out. But then after you've worked it in a little bit, you can actually just bring your tapestry needle sort of through your I-cord. And here, now I'm going to just pull all this tail through, take off my tapestry needle. I just give it like so when I pull on this now, it's kind of like making my I-cord sort of shrink down here because I'm pulling that tail tight. I'm going to do that for just a second so I can trim the yarn. And then once I pull it, the tail is completely gone. And so for all of the tails that I've made from the leaf, from the stem, from even the green up here, I'll kind of work those back down into the I-cord because it's such an easy way to hide the ends. And then with the rest of them, with like the pink or whatever color you're using for the flower, you can just weave them right into right into your flower, and you have your cute little tulip.
All right. That is
Yeah.
fantastic. We do have a few more minutes. So, anybody that's viewing, if you have a question that you haven't asked yet, this is the time to get it in. Jen, I'm going to start with a really general question that I've been hanging on to here from Zena.
Okay.
Zena is a new viewer, been knitting for years, but I have to now start from the beginning on buying needles and patterns. So, do you have sweater patterns to download on your site or anything else you'd like to talk about?
Yes, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and tilt up so you guys can stop looking at my hands. Yes. So on the Knitting Circle website, we do have a shop area of the website, and there are some beautiful patterns there. We do have a couple of sweater videos on the website right now. We will be having more coming soon. But yes, if you want to explore sweater knitting, you should definitely check out the shop section of our website, because we do have some sweater patterns there for you.
Great. I also need to point out that your felting idea seems to be a hit. There are
Oh,
quite a few people that are excited about that idea. We have mention of perhaps adding them to a hat once you felt the fabric.
yes, I think that's such a cool idea. That's so cool. Yeah, definitely.
All right, so I'm going to give a couple more moments for last minute questions to trickle in. But Jen, I also want to give you an opportunity to share any additional thoughts about this project or anything with our little spring mini series that you want to leave us with before we have to say goodbye. Now's a great time.
Sure. I mean, this is just like anything in knitting. If you are a beginner, consider yourself a beginner, or you're just coming back to knitting after a long period of time of being away, just don't be scared to try it. One of the biggest tips I always give people is it's just sticks and strings. So even if you really mess it up, which I mean, we all mess it up. Again, it doesn't matter if you're a beginner or an expert, everybody messes up their knitting sometimes. But at the end of the day, it's still just sticks and string. The worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to have to pull it out and start over with, which, yes, that is a lot of time maybe that you put into something that you have to start over, but you're only going to get better. Things are only going to get easier with time. This particular project, like I said, if you are a brand new knitter, I mean, sure, maybe try it. If you're an adventurous person, you could make this as your first project. But if you're a brand new knitter, maybe check out our Learn to Knit series or try a couple of easy patterns first. And then absolutely, this is a great sort of adventurous beginner pattern that if you take the time to do this flower, you really have learned some things that you now can take forward to knit other things. Now you know how to do I-cord, you know how to increase and decrease, you know how to pick up and knit. So basically you've learned everything you need to know to then go on and knit a sweater if you want to. So just don't be afraid to give it a try.
All right, I do see a final question here. Just a reminder, if anybody is looking to download these patterns for today's project and any of the projects throughout the week, you will go ahead and click the link, and all the information for how you can get those patterns is there for you. So with that said, there aren't any other questions that have come in. So I'm gonna let Jen say a quick goodbye, and then it's gonna be back to me for some reminders for the end of our day today. So go ahead and send us off, Jen.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much for joining me. I know that this series is so much fun. I've been catching some of them this week as well. I'm kind of a very beginner sewer, so I've been enjoying the sewing videos that we've already seen this week. So I hope that you enjoyed learning to knit the tulip with me, and I hope that you enjoy watching the videos from the rest of the week.
Yes, indeed. I know that all of our instructors so far have been talking about each other's projects. So it's a fantastic way to get in and dabble in some other hobby, some other crafting that maybe isn't your number one go-to. You can try some of these projects out and see if the other crafting areas of the world are interesting to you. And that said, anybody that is doing these projects, we would love for you to share them with us. And if you are going to make the projects from any of the mini series this week, use the hashtag share Craftsy. It's a great way to see what everybody else is up to in the community and maybe get a chance to be spotlighted on one of our accounts as well. So before I let you go for today's session, a quick reminder to join us tomorrow. We're going to start at 2 p.m. Central Time, and tomorrow we're going to be streaming live with our master pastry chef, Colette Christian. She is going to be providing her live tutorial on making Italian braided sweetbread, one of my personal favorites. I'm very excited for this one. on, and you can download your recipe right now using the link in the description before tomorrow's event. And then of course you can find the entire remaining mini-series schedule in the video description as well. So we hope to see you for our remaining projects this week. Until then, take care. Thank you.